You're watching FJTN, the Federal Judicial Television Network.
Good morning, may I help you?
You sure may.
Court employees have to realize that they're part of the security system.
Hey, I know you, right? You work in there, right?
Just because a person is well-dressed, well-mannered, doesn't mean that they are a security threat or not a security threat. If you're in a place you say nothing ever happens here, it might be the very place that something happens, because people go to places where there are weaknesses.
Live from the Federal Judiciary Studios in Washington, D.C., the Federal Judicial Center presents Safety Series, Court Staff Safety.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Bill Timish, sitting in for Mark Maggio, who's a little bit under the weather this week. Today, our broadcast will be on court staff safety. We have 5 vignettes to show you and discuss, but before we get started with our program, I'd like to introduce our panel. With us today, we have first on my far left, Judd Watkins, who's the Chief Deputy Clerk for the District Court in Hawaii. Next to him is Ellie Gigante, who's the Probation Clerk in the District of New Jersey, and also the former President of the Probation Pretrial Clerks Council. And to my right, we have Kathleen Farrell, who is the Clerk of Court for New York Southern Bankruptcy Court. Also with us by phone, we have Stefan Harris, who is the Chief Deputy for District Court in Wyoming, and John Toomey, who's the Probation Clerk for the District of Maryland, a real long way from here. So welcome to our panel, and I'd like to begin first by giving you just a brief overview of what we'll do today. We have 5 vignettes to show you, and after each vignette, we'll give you a few minutes to reflect and discuss at your local offices, and then we'll bring it back here at the table for a more thorough discussion. We also have, about halfway through, an interview with Mark Farmer. Mark is the Chief Inspector for the Office of Judicial Protective Services for the United States Marshal Service. He has a lot to say about court staff safety and about the safety system, so we'll look forward to seeing that. We will also appreciate if you have time to look at your handout that we have available. There'll be additional questions you might want to look at and discuss to relate this to your own experiences. So stay tuned after this broadcast for some further discussions. And finally, as with any FJTN program, we would appreciate faxes during the broadcast. So please be sure and pay attention. There's a phone number coming up. It should be at the lower third of your screen. So anytime during this broadcast you have questions about the vignettes or our discussion, fax those to us and I'll get to as many as I can. So I think that takes care of our typical housekeeping here. And I'd like to start us off with our first vignette. We've titled each of these, and this one is appropriately titled The Angry Debtor. Let's take a look.
Good morning, may I help you?
You sure may.
Okay, do you have a case number?
Look, I filed this case because I needed the situation resolved. Time is of the essence, but now we've got these creditors' committees buzzing around with their lawyers and nothing's getting resolved. I'm beginning to think this was just a big mistake.
Let me just pull this up so I understand what's going on, okay? Okay, you filed on September 18. The creditors' meeting was on the 27th. You have a trustee and a creditors' committee. So far, the case appears to be proceeding on course. Is there something specific?
Well, no, look, if you think this is on course, I disagree. This is not good enough.
I'm sorry, but unless there's something specific...
I just want to unfile. Who do I talk to about unfiling?
That's not such a simple thing, sir. You see,
God damn it! I want out of this. I don't care what you have to do, but you get me out of this and you do it now.
Well, I hope that wasn't his first day on the job, but things aren't going too well. But what an opportunity for training for that employee. I'm sure he has some good discussion coming up. What we're going to do at this time is give you a few minutes at your sites to discuss what you just saw related to your own experience. We'll come back in 3 minutes, and then I'll turn it to the table here for a thorough review. We'll see you in about 3. welcome back. I hope you had a good start to your discussions. Let's see, this is on bankruptcy, debtor. Give me a minute to think who I should turn to. I think Kathleen. So what are your reactions when you watch this?
Well, first of all, hopefully at this location there's a duress alarm and it was pushed immediately as soon as he threw that file on the table. Sometimes the presence of a CSO can just diffuse the situation. My advice to him would be to be very careful what he says in a situation, well, in any situation. Make sure it's not something that can be construed as expert opinion or legal advice, and certainly have a mechanism in place to signal for help. If there is no duress alarm, have something in place where he can signal for help. And believe it or not, this scene is not that uncommon in a bankruptcy court. We have irate debtors, we have irate creditors. Anybody who's working on the front line in intake or records or any of the places where a person is going to come into physical contact with the employee can be a very stressful situation, especially for a new employee without some preparation. So some tools of that we've actually covered in mediation might come in handy if the situation doesn't get too out of control. For example, you might want to try to validate, to empathize, to clarify, to summarize. Keep the communications open-ended with this person. Don't be judgmental, be non-judgmental. Try to reframe the question, try to diffuse the tension, clarify what the person's real concerns are. It probably would have been better if that employee did not give any opinion on the progress of the case. He sort of inadvertently did so by saying your case appears to be on track, which just seemed to infuriate him a little bit more. Instead, he might have been better off using more generic terms. He could have stopped after reciting the facts and saying, what further information can I offer you? When the debtor said that he wanted out of this, the employee might have deflated the situation by showing some empathy and stating, I understand. Let me check and see what other information I can provide to you. And then he would have been able to excuse himself and perhaps go solicit the assistance of a supervisor, which might have helped a little bit. And he didn't put any distance between himself and that debtor until the very end. He probably should have done that a little bit earlier.
Perhaps a little reflection on how he's affecting the encounter with his own behavior is important.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, John, as a follow-up to what we heard from Kathleen, what danger signs did you see from your perspective in this scenario?
Well, when he first came in and threw the paperwork down on the counter was an immediate danger sign that I saw. And then his raised voice and his language and trying to reach over the counter. I mean, it was all done so fast. It's almost like everything happened at the same time. So at the moment that he raised his voice and threw the papers is when I would have been very concerned of how this conversation was going to continue.
Right. So he has to define that as a dangerous situation and act accordingly, I take it. Ellie, as far as we talked a little bit briefly here about the verbal skills or how to manage that, do you have ideas or perspectives on how to deal with that verbally, what the person might be able to do?
Yeah. It's not a good idea to give an opinion and say it's not such a simple thing. Once he was already upset at this point, so you would or what I would do is try to tell him that there's someone here that handles this, and let me get that person for you. This way, that whole way you're stepping back, you're moving away from the situation, and you're letting him know that you are taking care of his problem. You're not putting him on hold. You're not telling him to step aside. You're dealing with it. If you tell him, let me direct you to the supervisor, a supervisor might be better able to help you, the man would feel that someone important is helping him that knows all about this, and he would be taken care of right away.
So validate basically the importance of the problem, but get yourself to a safe spot also.
Exactly. And once you have the distance, if you there should be some kind of a code word already in place so that your coworkers would know that you have a situation and they would be available to help you. If someone needed to step in, they would either press the alarm, the duress button, or get the CSO if you didn't have a duress button.
Okay. Let's kind of expand that a little bit regarding safety procedures and what you might have available. Judd, what kinds of procedures, safety, panic buttons, what are the things he has available? right
Well,
now?
I think in most offices there are panic buttons or duress buttons, and they're readily accessible. I think just as important as that is the understanding between the clerk's office and the U.S. Marshal Service or the CSOs as to exactly what to expect when the panic button is pushed.
Okay, and go on with that. What are the things that will happen, and how immediate does someone show up?
Well, a familiar kind of understanding is that the CSOs respond to the scene, and first they just sort of create a presence. They just observe and assess and then decide what the source of the threat is and what kind of a response would be appropriate after that. So mindful of that, I think intake clerks, deputy clerks at all places, when they push a duress button, they'll know exactly what to expect. That is, the CSOs or the deputy marshals will respond to the scene, and the first thing they'll do is just sort of create a calming presence.
Okay. I take it that they're aware of that, and they've probably had discussions with the Marshal Service or CSOs about that procedure.
Absolutely. Discussions at the time the duress system was set up, and also they've seen it in use many times, so they're familiar with exactly what happens when you do press the duress button.
Now, I know in your work that you've been involved in setting up barriers for clerk's office in bankruptcy, and there's no barrier here. We see it's an open counter. Does that concern you, and do you think that that's typical of situations?
Well, even the barrier we see in this video is, or could be, a very effective safety measure. Unfortunately, the intake clerk in this particular video leans forward rather than backward as things tend to escalate, so he's not getting the full benefit of that barrier in this little scene.
Okay, so you've got to use the equipment that's there for your protection.
You've got to use the equipment that's there, right?
All right, thank you. John, if I can bring you back for another question here, and this has to do with potentially if there are bystanders or witnesses to this encounter, they see an escalated argument, what should they be doing?
If I were a bystander on the same side of the counter as the angry debtor, I would try and remove myself from that area. If I were an employee, a fellow employee, I would try and remain calm first, and I would ask my coworker if he needed any assistance. That would make the upset person aware that his actions are being observed by other people. If that didn't make the man calm down any, I would call for a supervisor and security from the nearest phone. I would not leave, that immediate area and leave my coworker up there alone.
Those are very good thoughts. That certainly could get bad very quickly, so I appreciate that. Stefan, if we can just sort of close this off by looking at mindset for a moment. Certainly with our previous series on officer safety, we've talked about crisis rehearsal and officer safety mindset in the field, home contacts, office settings. For court staff in general, how important is mindset for safety, and how should that be developed?
It's of the utmost importance, and considering the comments that's already been mentioned, I think awareness training is absolute for court personnel. I think we need to tap our resources with the U.S. Marshal Service, Federal Protective Services. They offer training sessions. We need to have our own practice sessions as to what we would do in situations such as this, and even programs such as this are great safety awareness, safety series. We need to get our staffs in front of the FJTN and see these kind of things and then discuss them as we're doing today. If we get this information in the employees' heads, even if before something happens, when it does happen, they'll be able to draw on that information. We need to get it in their heads, get that training, and make that focus and awareness able for them to be able to draw on the information when they need it.
Right. Thanks for that free advertisement. I guess at this point I'll mention that, Stefan, what we are going to do, and it'll, I think, help with this broadcast, we will have a special training tape that will be developed afterwards at the time of registration or even after. Court staff and court unit executives can contact the FJC and get a tape of the vignettes. So that's definitely an important one for crisis rehearsal and for preparing and discussing what to do next. So good thoughts, and hang through for the rest of it. At this time, we're going to kind of move on to another vignette, and this one takes place outside, so we're kind of moving from the office to outside the building, and I think that's important to issues which do occur in the workplace. Sometimes they're not right there in the building. This one we're calling outside encounter. Let's take a look.
No, it is not tomorrow. It is Thursday. Of course I'm sure. I have a calendar right here in my purse. Hold on a minute, okay? I'm going to check to be sure.
Hey, I know you, right? You work in there, right? Right?
Yes.
I go in there for probation. Hey, do they have a warrant out for me?
I don't know. Why don't you go inside and ask your probation officer?
Oh, you know. You're just not
I'm gonna
telling.
call you back.
Come on, you gotta help me out here. Come on, don't play dumb with me. Just tell me what you know, that's all I ask.
Well, I think that definitely goes to show that it really is safer to work through your breaks and really never venture outside. So applaud to those supervisors that think you should do that. Seriously, this brings up a lot of issues regarding unexpected encounters, and also that you might be recognized officially in your unofficial capacity when you're outside of the office. What kinds of things should you consider? What kinds of things do you do, and how do you inform your court staff to manage those safely? So we're again going to give you 3 minutes to talk around the table, and we'll come back here with a further discussion. Welcome back, everyone. John, I'd like to start with you for our panel discussion, and just start by saying, is there anything that this employee might have done to have discouraged this conversation, or was she pretty much stuck with it?
I think since the lady was on the telephone already, she could have made the person she was talking to aware of the situation and asked that person to call her office and have them send out an officer, or even call 911 for her. And she should have also put her phone down and her bag down so she could have both hands to make space in between her and the gentleman, and also to tell the man to stay away. And she should have said it loud enough for the other people outside walking up the walkway to hear her and alert them that there is something wrong. If that didn't work, she could have called to them specifically and asked them to help her or allow them to walk up the ramp with them and into the building. And once she was inside the building and away from the offensive person, she could then call and notify the appropriate people. But try and get away from there as quick as possible. You're outside, there's been no security, you don't know what that person has on them.
Good point. So very, very clear, direct verbal commands and getting herself out of that situation and getting with the group as quick as possible. John, another question comes to mind, and that has to do with the disclosure of court business. I mean, certainly people might come up to you and ask you that they know you, District of Maryland, they might see you elsewhere, and they'll try and find out about a case, about an officer, about a warrant. What are the things to remember as an employee of the court when you're confronted that way?
Well, apparently the person did recognize her. If the lady had turned around and said, no, I don't work in there, I'm not who you think I am, I think that might have aggravated the person a little bit more, because he did recognize her and he knew who she was. Definitely not give out any information, and to tell them, you know, if it was too bad, tell them it's a nice day, why don't you have a seat, I'll go inside and see if I can find someone to help you, or get someone to bring the information out to you.
Okay, so definitely separate herself from that situation.
Definitely.
All right, good thoughts, good idea. And Ellie, just to go along with the reactions from John a little bit, as he mentions, this employer really didn't directly or clearly get out of that situation, and she looked a little fearful and distracted with the cell phone. What are the things she can do to regain a better presence and to really, you know, sharpen herself so that she doesn't look like she's a potential victim here?
The first thing is to always give the appearance of being in control. Try not to let him see that you are afraid. If they see you're fearful, then he feels that he has power over you, and he could be even more intimidating. What she did, the action of moving toward the group of people as they were walking in the building, was a very good idea. What I didn't like was that she didn't use her cell phone to her advantage. She should have told that person, I have a problem here, and either ask the person, call someone for me, or if I don't get back to you in 1 minute, then you'll need to call someone. She could have handled this offender in a better way also. She could have told him that she wasn't familiar with his case. If he wanted to step in the building, she could get his phone number and have the probation officer call him. By bringing him to the building where the court security is, she's making herself safe and diffusing that situation as well. A lot of people don't realize that even though the officers are the ones that go in the field, the clerks and the other support staff are still recognized as probation employees. An offender doesn't always know the difference between an officer and the clerk or secretary, receptionist. They just know that you're from probation, and they think that you're the same as they are. So you have to always be aware. You can never, just because you're near a federal building with security, doesn't mean that you're safe. Safety is your own responsibility first, and you have to, if you make yourself safe, you're also helping others to be safe as well, and to follow certain procedures so that you can guide this gentleman toward the security or away from you.
So she can, in fact, redirect what's happening to a safer location. And the part you mentioned about presence is important here. And Judd, I want to talk a little bit about body positioning or presence. For any of us, certainly we all work in different environments, but there are times we need to be very alert to our surroundings, and we need to project an image of confidence and clarity, as John said, very direct and clear what we're doing. What are some techniques, or what would you say about body positioning here?
Well, I think you've touched on what is her problem from the very start of this vignette, and that is that she's surprised by this individual in an open area. She's distracted by the cell phone. I think she's looking in an address book or something like that. If she's going to use the phone to ask for help, she needs to do that early on and then put that phone away. Because she's on the defensive early on, her hands are encumbered, she's surprised by this individual. As soon as he comes into her body space, she needs to put those things away and get her hands out in front of her so that she can deflect or evade without having so many things to put away and take care of. Once she's in motion, it seems to me it would be better to direct this gentleman on the sidewalk in front of her rather than walking forward and kind of talking to him over her shoulder. I think with a greater awareness of the potential threat that he may pose, she would be more careful about turning her back to him. Then finally, she's very late in this vignette calling to her friends up the sidewalk. I think if she's going to call to them, she needs to call in a more clear and directive kind of way, letting her know that she's got a problem and she's trying to attract their attention.
Okay, and that's an important issue regarding how you might be able to use others. Stefan, just to sort of close off this one and to talk a little bit about what Judd mentioned, other ways or techniques to signal the assistance of others in this kind of situation, what else would you have to recommend for that?
Well, I think Judge is right on point. Judge is right on point. She has to get to that group and not waste any time getting to that group. Those are probably a group of people she worked with, and she could do so by calling out and asking them questions. I wouldn't want to retard the movement of the group toward the building, because if it's a courthouse, there's your security right inside that door. There are CSOs or someone there, and you want to keep that group moving toward that security, but certainly do whatever you can to get inside that group, to separate yourself from the individual and make yourself a part of the group, still being conscious of not putting them in danger, but if the situation warranted, she'd want to get right part of that group and continue to move right towards the security.
Very good points, and I guess from this discussion we should also reflect that your court business is not just in your court capacity or location, that you are in fact recognizable to others, and that you need to pay attention to where you're at and be ready to prepare to respond to those kinds of things. So we're now going to take another vignette and take a look at it, and this one has to do with a different type of situation when personal issues might cross into the workplace. This vignette we've entitled Personal Business. It happens very quickly, so don't take any breaks yet. Just stay focused here, keep your eyes open, no blinking, and let's take a look at it.
Missed you last night, babe.
No.
You surprised to see me? Hmm?
I'm sure those two employees know exactly what to do. Don't think for a minute that they're confused or don't know what that situation's about. So that's the I guess realistic nature of these kinds of things. They do happen very fast and often with a lot of ambiguity and not necessarily a lot of clear signals. So we're going to give you a few minutes here to talk about this and to relate this to your practices, what you would want to do or have happen, and then we'll bring it right back here to the table. We'll see you in 3 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Before we start the discussion, I should mention that we are going to have a trivia test here regarding the FJC staff who appeared in that last vignette. You can successfully name that staff member and fax it in to us. One of you will win a guest panel membership for one episode here. So take a look, let us know what you thought that was. Kathleen, I want to start with you on this one. And basically, there's a couple choices here. Do you intervene to help that employee, assuming that there's something wrong going on, or do you immediately report it? What do you do?
That's a tough decision. The first thing I'd like to say is that this looked like it was an incident where this employee was having trouble with this person all along, that this was not a stranger that she encountered. And if she had alerted security in the beginning, when this incident, before something happened, they could have at least been on the lookout for him when he came into the building and probably would have been following him around. And so it might have been prevented to begin with. But since there were other people present, so she had the presence of mind to even look around and notice that they were there, she could have been able to use them to her advantage and to use them to at least call for help. And it looked like the bystanders were really uncertain as to whether to jump in or not, where they weren't sure whether she really wanted help or not. So she needed to be the one to take a proactive role and provide a signal to them. Certainly, if you're a bystander and fearful of getting harmed yourself, there's still some action you can take. You can call 911. You can call security. Anything you can do to help her out of this situation would certainly help. And it's certainly up to the individual whether they feel capable of interfering physically, but there certainly are things they could do.
Good points.
Not to just abandon her.
Yeah, and I like your perspective. I mean, certainly this is all part of crisis rehearsal, I suppose. You need to know and think, what would I do in this situation? And if I know I will call out loudly, that'll kind of break all that ambiguity, and those people are going to help me, so that's real important. Right. And how about the bystanders, Ellie? Are there things that they can do beyond immediate reporting this to a CSO that would be helpful?
Yes. If you have the presence of mind, you can approach and say, oh, are you ready for lunch? We're leaving early for lunch today. I didn't realize that. Sometimes you can diffuse the situation if you enter into the situation and act as though you didn't notice that he was trying to drag her away. The other thing is to get the physical descriptions. If you feel that you want to notify someone that this is not a good situation, in this scenario, you know this is not good. But there are times when you're not sure whether is this something serious or is she in danger. The best thing to do would be to get as much of a physical description as you possibly can. Hair, eyes, clothing. If he's pulling her, where you see him pulling her, what direction they're going, and then you'll be able to give a better description to the court security once they come on the scene.
So you can, as a bystander, certainly slow this incident down a little bit by calling out to that employee and make sure during that time you're collecting information for CSOs.
Right. If they know that they're not alone, there's someone there. Okay. It can stop the situation or calm it down a little bit.
Right, which is going to be important here. Judd, as far as how this is reported, what's that process? And if you could talk a little bit more about those procedures and who do we talk to, who do we call, that type of thing.
Well, just a couple of quick points. In the first place, you do have 2 observers in this video, and that gives us a great resource to draw upon. One person should call in to the CSO's security desk or the Marshal's Control Center. And I think there's a learning point in this video that our cell phones should be pre-programmed with that security hotline number there so that one keystroke will dial that number automatically. I think that'll speed things up. The other observer should probably continue just to be a good witness to whatever happens next. We don't know from this video whether this is going to escalate further, whether it's going to become a more serious incident, or whether it's going to dwindle off into nothing. But in any event, whatever it is, it should be witnessed and it should be observed, and that's what the second observer here can do, is just stay by the scene. Of course, a person calling security is going to want to identify themselves. They're going to want to give the exact location where the incident is going on and then relay exactly what they see, not what they think is going to happen or whatever, just exactly what they see, and then ask security assistance.
Okay.
It should be short and sweet, but it should be very definitive about where you are and why you're asking for help.
Excellent. And again, the importance of using a team approach to this, too, as far as that goes. John, let me just ask you, I know you do some training and preparation in your office for different kinds of situations. Do you have any scenario training or develop awareness regarding these potential incidents, domestic incidents that might occur?
We've had some officer scenario training within our office since I've been here, but my concern on the vignette that we just saw is where this happened. Was it, if it was in a federal building, I think it may have been approached different than if it was in a private building. As far as if it was in a federal building and it was inside, that the man went through a metal detector and so forth, and he wouldn't have any weapons on him. If this were to happen in a public building, you don't know if he has a weapon in his pocket or, you know what I mean? There's that big unknown, and that would affect how or if someone would go to the woman's aid immediately.
And just by coincidence, you work in a private office building,
yes,
correct?
I do.
So what procedures in your district would be followed or appropriate here?
In a private building, we would first notify the Baltimore City Police. 911 would be the first line that we would call. And also, we would then call over to the CSOs in the marshal's office. They're a block away from us, and they would and have been over here very fast. But our first line would be to call 911.
And John, just to give you a compliment here, since we paid all that per diem to bring you on the phone here, obviously you rattled that information off because you've been trained, you're aware, and you know what to do immediately.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. At this point, I want to remind everyone, if you have questions that you'd like to send to us about any of the vignettes, again, the fax number is appearing, and be sure to fax those in. And I know the panel would have fun with those, and also I want to make sure that we reflect the issues most of concern to you. So please go ahead and ask those questions, send those in. At this time, we're going to move into a new segment, and what we're going to do in a moment is take a look at an interview with Mark Farmer. And Mark Farmer is the Chief Inspector for the Office of Judicial Protective Services for the United States Marshal Service. His office essentially supports and trains the over 3,000 court security officers, and also those that are available and important to protecting the federal courthouses and other secure facilities. So he has a lot to say about safety and also about the role of staff in developing a chain of safety. So let's take a look at that interview. It's great to have you here, Mark.
Well, good morning. It's good to be here.
We've, in our previous programs, worked with officers a lot about safety mindset, color code of awareness, and adopting that philosophy. Do you think for non-officers in the courts that's also important to adopt a safety mindset?
Yes, I think it's extremely important because when things are going to happen, people look for the weak points. And if someone's behavior doesn't suggest that they're aware of their surroundings, they're aware of security concerns, then the person, they can become a part of the scenario. I don't want anybody to be paranoid or overwhelmed, but you're in a public domain, which is the court facilities. I mean, it's part of the democracy of our country. But today, in a post-9/11 environment, there does require a little more alertness. I think that court employees have to realize that they're part of the security system. For example, if a court person has a badge or ID system, they're part of that, and they can compromise that particular system if it's not used properly. You have to be aware of what you're doing because you can inadvertently allow someone to gain access.
Safety and security is really interdependent. It's not just my safety or personal safety in the clerk's office or bankruptcy, but that what I do impacts everyone else in the office.
That's exactly right. You may be safe, but then again, you may have violated the potential safety of someone else.
As far as court staff and looking at how some of them would like to make assessments, many would like to have a checklist so they can screen visitors or people that do business with the courts and say, this person looks dangerous, this person isn't dangerous. Is that realistic to have such a checklist? Is there such a checklist?
Often we're driven by our perceptions and culture. And so just because a person is well-dressed, well-mannered, doesn't mean that they are a security threat or not a security threat. So I think that you have to develop sort of a security frame of reference or use your intuition. I think it speaks very loud. You should look at people's proximity in terms of spatial reference, their tone of voice, their posture, if they appear extremely nervous, the questions they're asking are not really making sense, because, I mean, as you dialogue with them, it also, if they really want something and you give them the thing that they're asking for and it doesn't seem to satisfy them, I think you have to be aware of that. And so a checklist is, I'm afraid of those in some respects. You can't put everything you need to know on that checklist.
How about, let's look at procedures just for a minute. Do you think it's more important to have those procedures in place versus, you know, focusing on your comfort level in a scenario?
Procedures are important because you need the structure. The structure begins to give you, if you use this illustration, the structure is the tracks that the train runs on. And so if you have the structure, then it becomes, you become safety-minded. So it does start with that. That's an education process. And I think that the procedures have to be in place and followed by everyone. The checking of ID. If you're in a controlled area, that should heighten your awareness. In other words, if there's a partition between you and that person, the petition is there for a reason. I would be very careful about taking people beyond that reception area unless you really understand what they're there for, you've identified them, the office is open, you know, all that is very important. If it's late and the office is closed and you're on your way out the door, then don't invite the person in, close the door and say, I'm sorry, you know, the office is closed, we open again in the morning, and I'm sure that somebody will be able to help you. But be careful not to give out information, especially if, for example, someone would say if so-and-so is in, you don't need to confirm or deny it. You could say, well, wait 5 minutes and I will check. But, you know, the idea of saying they never come in on Fridays. They usually come in at 10. I mean, it's just too much information and unnecessary.
So I take it from that the coworkers and in fact all staff should be ideally trained on how to deal with those issues.
It's training, but it's awareness training rather than some type of physical confrontation training. It's being aware of your surroundings, having sort of an exit strategy. I think it's good for employees to sometimes in their habits to commentate some to themselves. And if this happened, what would I do? If I'm going to my car, I'm going to make sure I have my keys ready. I want to look, you know, around my car before I get into it. I want to look inside the windows of my car to see if there's something on the floor or something on the seat that wasn't there before. Those kinds of things. If somebody's following me to my car and there are not other people around, again, do I need to go in another direction?
And you keep kind of coming back, I think, to an important theme, which is that there is a chain developing when that first person enters the office on business, that if someone, whether it's a CSO or court employee, sees or feels something's wrong, that they have a duty to communicate that or act on that before it gets all the way up to another issue.
I think you're right. I think we live in an environment today where people are asking for identification. Do some screening. That tends to slow things down a little bit, and the person may change their mind about being there. If they have a real purpose, they'll stay. If not, you may frustrate them and they may leave.
Good thoughts for us. Let's take another look at this, and I just want to talk a little bit about the office setting and safety in the office. If I'm in the clerks or bankruptcy or district and I feel that at the moment I'm immediately threatened with an assault, what are some of the first things I need to do?
Okay. You need to create distance between you and the person that you feel that may attack you. I mean, their arms are so long and their legs are so long, and so if you create distance, you create sort of a level of safety. You should also try to alert the attention of other people in and around the office that something's going on and that this is just not another day. And you only have a few moments to do that. They may be in a position where they can call the marshal's office. They may be in a position that they can alert someone to assist. If, depending on the situation, you might want to have more people in the office come to the counter or something to give you a strategic advantage.
All right, so unless you're very well trained in verbal skills or diffusion, you shouldn't try to manage it all by yourself, I take it.
That's exactly right. It should be a standard protocol that perhaps when there is somebody who's acting in a very in a behavior that's somewhat threatening, that you should automatically begin to call for help rather than to wait for the event to go further. Some people come into the door at a very high level, and you may not be able to calm them down. In that case, I think you should notify the U.S. Marshal Service office. They will in turn dispatch either a deputy U.S. Marshal or a CSO. But it's always better to err on the side of caution than to really to confront these people. There are some of us who think that we can handle almost anything, but sometimes we come up against things that we don't expect.
And let's now, I guess, leave the office, go outside. So if I'm on my lunch break or on my way to work and something happens, and in this case, let's say someone asks me about a warrant or asks me about court business, what should I be doing then?
You should be very concerned. You know, post 9/11 environment, terrorists, they look for creatures of habits. They really observe what people are doing. And today, information really is power. They don't know what's going on inside that building. And by approaching you, they can find out. You know, it's okay in some instances to say, I don't know that information and I can't help you, but direct them to the front of the building or into the building, because think about it, the security is already there. And then they would encounter the security rather than you trying to manage that particular problem.
Being aware, but also looking aware. So you're not walking out of the building with your eyes down on the ground, so to speak, but you look like you're confident and aware of what's going on around you.
You get, just as though you get prepared to embrace the elements that are outside. If it's cold, you know, you button your coat, you do all those kinds of things. If there's late and you're leaving the office, I think you ought to let someone know. You ought to find out if there's someone else in the building and ask, do you mind walking me to my car? Or ask, in some informal instances, deputy marshals have walked people to their car, and you'll be surprised, a coworker. And so don't run the risk if you don't have to.
And you mentioned terrorists, which is a big flag for most people these days. Is there a concern, or do you have a concern that issue does need to be looked at as far as people trying to poke at our security, so to speak?
Well, I would just say this, that the nature of terrorism is unexpected, so you can't really, in an absolute sense, plan for it. I mean, it's by design, it's when you don't plan. And I don't want people to overreact, but think about when things happen, it happens by a chain of events. It could be a chain of information, a chain of testing the systems to see if someone can get in. Again, they're looking for vulnerabilities. But sometimes, even though people are not quote-unquote terrorists, they are people who still want to see if somehow they can compromise the system. I think that staff ought to report incidents that occur directly outside of the house, incidents that may occur at their house or on the way home that may be directly related to their job. For example, I noticed that I've seen a gentleman or a lady that was in the court that's come several times, and all of a sudden I found them en route with me home.
And another question, just to look a little more broadly perhaps at things. We've talked in the series a lot about the importance of training and also the role of the manager. So if you were speaking to court unit executives regarding staff safety and safety systems, what role can managers play essentially in doing that?
The manager has to emphasize to the person that you're part of the security process. Not only are you here to do your job, but you're part of it. Security is everyone's concern. Many people take their surroundings for granted, and if you're in a place you say nothing ever happens here, it might be the very place that something happens, because people go to places where there are weaknesses. I think that with the proper security procedures in place, employee awareness, and then the employee owning the information and applying it to their personal security is the three most important things that need to happen.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
Well, you're welcome.
Welcome back, everybody. And John, just to really change the pace here, I'm going to start with you. And
okay.
ask you the question, as you reflect on that interview, what types of issues really stand out in terms of your personal role in safety?
my personal role for my personal safety, I like the idea of being aware of where you are, knowing who's around you. And where Mr. Farmer said about the weakest link, people are always, victims are the weakest link. And I think that you need to be aware of who you are, where you are, who's around you, and not look like a victim. Well, it's kind of hard, I guess, to look confident, but if you think you're confident, you're going to be, and not look like a victim.
So, and certainly I know that you've been involved in safety education, and I guess, we've talked a lot about first-line safety at the FJC, and I know that's what you're saying is very important, that you're right there and you really are going to set the tone for that office.
Yes, because especially in an intake situation, if you're inside of a building and someone comes in, I mean, after all, nobody that comes into our office is actually happy to be here because of their situation. Really? And when they come in, if they come off being, loud like the first person, the angry debtor, and the employee looks scared, then that person knows that they can go a lot further with that employee and shake them up as much as they possibly can. So by staying calm and looking like you got your wits about you, I think it's going to diffuse the situation.
Very good reflections, John. Thank you very much. And Kathleen, I know they're always in a good mood when they go into bankruptcy, so, but
just like they are probation.
That's right. A lot of happy customers out there.
Yeah.
But taking a look, from a manager's perspective, and again reflecting back on this interview, what kinds of things stand out for you?
Well, first of all, I think his comments were right on target. He made lots of good common sense. Create a distance, alert others around you, call for help, which some of the things we've spoken about earlier. The one thing I really liked was that we're all part of the security, that be aware of our surroundings. We all make it happen. We're in New York City. The staff is very aware of their surroundings outside the building. They're pretty much very street smart. They grew up in New York for the most part. I think maybe when you should come in the building, when you go through the security, and they know that everybody that's in the building has gone through security, that might create a false sense of awareness and, of security for them, and they might not be as on their mark as they would be out in the subway, for example. So I think that's a really good tip for them for everybody to just make sure that you are part of the security and not part of the problem.
And definitely being aware of where you are at all times.
Absolutely.
And what's around you.
Absolutely.
Stefan, let's talk a little bit about demographics and districts and perhaps some differences, because we talk here about street smarts, and we know the urban districts that have issues which really focus that attention. In smaller or more rural districts, Stefan, what type of mindsets at play, or are there any differences in your safety mindset?
Well, I think Mark Farmer mentioned that we're driven by our perceptions and our culture. I spent the first 16 years of my career in the Northern District of Ohio and came here to Wyoming in 2000, and I'll share that it's a definite different perceptions and culture in Cleveland than it would be in Cheyenne. However, he stressed also the fact of awareness, and one thing that was just mentioned about street smarts, and that may be the difference in the way people approach things in a Cleveland versus a Cheyenne, is that street smarts mentality. But if we make everyone a training awareness towards safety, then everyone is going to be prepared for that. And I think that even in a district like Wyoming, there is a heightened of awareness. And that is a protection, and people are aware, and they're trained to be aware, even in a rural setting versus an urban setting.
And Stefan, as far as your own training program and what you do in your district, have you noticed, or have there been changes in your training since 9/11?
Oh, absolutely, and I think that just because of the post-9/11 atmosphere or environment, as been mentioned, there has to be more of awareness and more of a beefed up of training. And remember, too, that in this circuit is where the Oklahoma bombing took place, and so that makes an awareness also, and the McVeigh trial was less than 100 miles away from this courthouse. So we are very much aware and continue that awareness training, but especially since post-9/11.
Well, good to you for doing that, and thanks for the comments. At this time, and I think kind of related to this discussion itself, we're going to look at another vignette that deals with issues as far as visitors to the court and how those visitors are or are not escorted through secure facilities. This one we're entitling Distinguished Visitors. Let's take a look at the tape.
Good morning.
Hi.
It's good to get indoors. I thought I was going to get frostbite. Did you hear they're predicting more snow for the weekend?
Oh, no. Haven't we had enough?
Looks like we're going to the same floor. Apparently somebody thinks we need an additional 4 inches. Supposed to start on Friday morning.
It's that darn groundhog.
Old Phil has done it again.
Nice talking to you. Have a good one.
Say, could you tell me where the probation office is?
Sure. It's right around the corner. That's where I'm headed. It's not open yet, though. They don't unlock the doors till 8.
Okay. I'm John Faraday from the Bureau of Prisons. I have an appointment with Officer Raines. You wouldn't be able to do a big favor for me and find out if she's in yet, would you?
Oh, sure. You can come in the back door with me. I'm Lisa. This is her office right here. Doesn't look like she's in yet, but she should be here in a few minutes. You want to wait for her in here?
That'll be great. Thanks. Much nicer than standing in the hall.
Want a cup of coffee?
No, thanks. I'll just sit in here and catch up on some paperwork while I wait.
See you.
Thanks again.
Wow. Well, just a disclaimer, we don't mean to impugn the Bureau of Prisons in this, and certainly I'm sure he was there just to leave a greeting card or something, but that definitely brings up a lot of issues about how you bring people into the office and how you provide or don't provide secure measures. So we're going to give you some time to reflect and react to this one in your offices. We'll be back here in about 3 minutes. Welcome back. John, again, we'll start with you on this one, and kind of a two-part question. First question is this situation realistic? And the second part, is there any condition or circumstance where you would let someone into your office outside of normal security or office hours?
After looking at the vignette, I don't see that vignette as being realistic. I can't imagine letting someone into the office space without seeing some kind of ID, at least two forms of identification. Identification that has their name and their office emblem on it, and also a personal form of identification to make sure that they match. This young lady let someone that she actually did not know, just went by their word, into an area and left them sit in that area unattended. If it was a member of the court family, and by the court family I mean a member of the clerk's office, public defender's office, marshals, U.S. attorneys that I personally knew, then I would let them come in, but they would stay with me in the reception area until I could find the officer that they were there to see. And if that officer wasn't due in yet or was not coming in, then I would address it to a supervisor. And to verify, like I said, I would have at least two forms of identification, photo ID, to make sure that they were who they were. I mean, she just left him in there and walked off. That gentleman could have left that area and gone to anywhere in the office that he needed to go or wanted to go.
And I think also, John, as we heard from Mark Farmer, that basically that by letting down the guard, the next employee walking into that situation is completely surprised by what happens.
Right. I mean, that briefcase, who knows what he had in his briefcase.
Okay. Well, those are good comments, and this was not a trick question, but I do need to say that this incident did occur in an office situation, so it's an actual incident, one of the couple that we have here that did occur, and it is a little bit frightening to think about how it occurred. But Stefan, I want to turn to you a little bit and talk a little bit about some potential stereotypes of situations or people that might let our safety guard down. For example, in this case, you have a charming gentleman who strikes up a good rapport, and if he knows a little bit about the quote-unquote system or knows the officers by name, may be able to talk himself into that situation. Talk a little bit about stereotypes and how they might affect or influence our safety mindset.
Well, this is a clear example of what we need to be very careful of not to do, not to fall into this trap or line of thinking that puts us in a comfort zone of this preconceived idea that this individual is okay because of the preconceived stereotype. Like you mentioned, the gentleman is well-dressed, he's elderly, and you could fall into, like I said, that comfort zone based on that preconceived idea. Going back to the second vignette, the outside encounter, that was a preconceived idea of an individual, the way he was dressed at work, the opposite way. The way he was dressed, the way he was conducting himself sent off other issues that would put you on guard. And so it should be the same here. We shouldn't fall into a trap because he's so smooth that we let our guard down. And that's something that's very dangerous. And as Mark Farmer mentioned, these are the things that people are going to do. They know what puts you in a comfort zone, so they're going to dress this way and conduct themselves this way to slyly get in, so to speak, into your comfort zone and allow you to drop your guard. So we have to be very careful about that.
And that's a critical issue to look at. Ellie, as far as dropping your guard or how you might unintentionally disclose court business in casual conversation, what are the dangers? How can that happen? How do you prevent it?
Well, you should try to maintain a distance and to be businesslike. Having a conversation on the elevator, there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But I noticed a few things, a few of her actions that made him more comfortable and gave encouragement. She leaned toward him. She tapped his arm, got very familiar with him, and I think that encouraged him to respond and get more familiar and convince her that he was an okay guy and they should let him in the office. I would like to point out that if it was a Bureau of Prisons official or someone from the Marshal Service, as they said their name, they would be showing their ID. So there would be no question as to who it is that you're speaking to. In our office, you get all kinds of people coming in. There's the white-collar crime, and they're sometimes more dangerous than the others because they give the appearance of being like they didn't do anything wrong and they're perfectly fine and should be treated the way you would treat your fellow employee rather than the person that belongs on the other side of the window. So you have to maintain a distance and to know that if he was official, he would be showing, as he said his name, the ID would be coming out at the same time.
Good point. Good point. And we don't know if that employee was trained already, but we need to think about why that's so important.
Exactly.
Kathleen, let's talk a little bit from a manager's perspective about preventative procedures or practices. So what should have been followed here? I think Ellie talked a little bit about it, but is there anything else you want to add?
I think just, if it looks at a place common sense prevails. He had this grin on his face that would make me suspicious to begin with. And then, as Ellie said, he should have been presenting his ID, and the staff should have been looking for that ID. He also hesitated when he said it was from the Bureau of Prisons, but she had gotten herself so familiar with the situation that she probably just overlooked that. She didn't pick up on the signals. Certainly, having policies in place where everyone who enters the building must go through security. Don't let someone into the office that you don't know before office hours. Certainly never leave somebody sitting in somebody's office in their private space. In New York, I hate to keep bringing this up, but in New York Southern,
you love New York.
I do like. I
okay,
do love New
that.
York, but in the City Hall in New York, a councilman brought a visitor into the building, and he didn't go through security because he was with the counselor, and the counselor sort of brought him in with him, and the visitor wound up shooting the councilman and killing him. So, even in cases where you think you know somebody, it's something that you should be aware of, not to let strangers roaming around your building and into private space, unattended specifically. That would have been. So I think just making people aware and having some policies and procedures in place that just is not allowed, I think would help.
I think this should be part of the training for new employees.
Absolutely.
To know that these things happen. People come in here and try to get something over on you. They try to get into the office. It should be done when someone first begins, and they're refresher courses, because as we said earlier, your level of awareness drops again once you feel secure, and you have to always be heightened to be aware of what's going around you and who is saying what they're saying, not only the words that they're saying, but their actions as well. Right. And it should come as second nature. When someone approaches you and says, I need to go back there, you shouldn't, immediately that will be a signal. Yeah. If you don't need to go back there,
I think she missed some signals here that he was sending her that he really didn't belong there. And just being aware of your surroundings. As Inspector Farmer said, be aware of your surroundings at all times.
So stay vigilant and follow your procedures. They're there for a reason, right?
Absolutely.
During the break, we did receive a fax. I'm going to go to that now because, we've kept Judd way too quiet. So I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm sure, it deals with this discussion, so I think it's an important one to get into. And the question is, what about staff members who bring in their relatives before or after office hours? Should that be allowed?
Well, I think it's generally not allowed, although policies may differ from district to district and office to office. Even in those areas where family members are allowed, they can be vouched in by employees before or after duty hours. It should be well understood that those guests vouched into the secure area are solely the responsibility of the employee who vouched them in. And they should remain in line of sight proximity to that employee the whole time they're there. Vouching in a group of people does not mean that they are then free to roam about the facility and so on. And again, I'm saying in those offices where policy will allow guests, family members, and others to be vouched in before and after the duty day, even then, the rule should be the employee who vouched them in is totally accountable for their conduct while they're in the office.
I take it that's a written or oral policy in your district known by everybody? Should
be a written policy, yeah.
All right. Thank you. And Stefan, just turning to you for a minute, how do you respond to that? Do you have similar procedures regarding relatives and family?
Well, we have similar procedures, and I think it's pretty common that relatives visit, and of course, in a public building, they still should have to go through the screening process and have to go through security like everyone else. But to get back into the secured area of the clerk's office, then they would have to be accompanied by the individual that they're coming to visit. And like Judd mentioned, that they should be accompanied with them at all times while they're back in the secured area, and that's something that I think is pretty common in most districts too.
Clear thing to think about. And what we're going to do now to sort of, I guess, ratchet this up a little bit, we're going to close the vignettes with a final one dealing with a very serious issue that could occur in any of the offices. Again, I think playing on the importance of vigilance. So this one we titled The Briefcase. Let's take a look.
Hi, Jeff. How's it going? Hey, did you leave your briefcase in my office? I wonder where it came from. Would Sherry left it here, do you think? Well, it's black, got a lot of pockets, kind of weather-beaten. I guess it doesn't look like Sherry. Let me see if there's a name in it, and I'll give you a call back.
I know a lot of you, I can hear all of you across the country say, don't touch that. Or we did kind of run short with our pyrotechnics. There might have been more, but it gives you a definite indication that curiosity is there, but what should that person really be doing? And what would you do or expect to have happen in your offices with this type of situation? So please take the final 3 minutes, use that to discuss this vignette or complete your taxes that are due, whatever you need to do, and we'll see you back here. Welcome back. I'm sure you had some good discussions going there. Sorry to interrupt, but we're going to have a couple more minutes here to talk about it. And Ellie, I'd like to start with you on just a general question about what makes up a suspicious object, because we have a briefcase here, but it could have been a knapsack next door here to the building where we're in. Where there was an evacuation due to a knapsack with a leaking lighter in it with fluid. But what makes up a suspicious object? What does it look like, or should we even get that refined?
No. So something suspicious is whatever looks out of place. It can be something that you're used to seeing all the time in a certain area that has just been moved. You have to be aware of your surroundings, and if you see something, just if it's out of place, treat it as a suspicious object. That you should take the procedures that are the policy for your office for what you do when you see something that is not familiar or is out of place. The first thing would be to call to see if it or to find out, not to call, to see if it belongs to anyone. And if anyone claims it, then your situation is taken care of. If no one can claim the object, you should go another step further with that and alert security.
So basically be aware of your surroundings first to know what's out of place, and then just make sure that this object, if it doesn't belong to anyone, we need to do something about getting away and dealing with it. Judd, since you're getting the faxes, I'll just continue that practice. I'm going to throw another question at you related to what Ellie just said, and that this individual asks, if an object might explode, shouldn't your first reaction be just to get out of the area? And I guess that assumes a presumption on your part that looks like it could, have an explosive device.
Well, you should certainly begin to distance yourself from the object, and you should alert others in the area to do likewise. You should tell other people to get away and tell them that you're contacting security. Just an added note, it'd be best to use a landline phone and not use a wireless device to make that call, because as we know these days, many of these improvised devices are set to detonate by certain wireless signals. So it's best to find a landline phone to make that call to security.
Okay, very good thoughts, and a lot of people may not have thought about that one, so very worthwhile. John, I want to kind of pick on you on this one and ask you what your practice might be, or what is your practice in your district if someone sees a suspicious object in their workspace, even whether or not it went through security.
If an employee were to come in and see a suspicious object, a bag, a box, or a mail bag in their chair or in their area that wasn't there before, that they never recognized before, I would hope that they would get onto the public address system and ask if anyone has left a package in John Smith's area, please call me, at that extension. Never, if it's suspicious, it's throwing off a warning sign to you already. Don't go over and touch it. Please don't do what they did in the vignette where the guy goes over and opens it up. But if it were outside in another area, an unsecured area, I would have someone tell someone to go and call building management in our case and the 911 for the police and marshals and CSOs and everybody to come over and check it out. But like Judd had said, do not use a cellular phone, because if it is an explosive, it could be set off by that phone. But location is everything as far as how you would handle it, or as I would handle it. If it's in someone's workspace, I would first do the overhead page. If there was no response to it, then I would take it further and call the court security or the marshals to come up and see what they want to do. They may want to hold off on calling 911. If it's out in a public area where there is no security, I would send someone to call 911 and building management and marshals.
A lot of good points made, and certainly following clear procedures and not letting time be your enemy. Those are important things to say, John. Kathleen, I kind of want to maybe change the direction of the topic and discuss how people respond in a workplace that has a lot of pressing business, especially in the courts, especially with issues that you're involved with. And there might be hesitancy to call in something that turns out to be, it's sugar that kind of just spilled out of someone's lunch, or something that's just, it is someone's briefcase because they've had a meeting. In fact, I think you've had several meetings here. I know that we do double duty at the center and the AO. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of people in and out of the building. And if I'm a new employee, I might feel quite embarrassed or upset if I was to call and it ended up in an evacuation that became, for something that was innocuous. How do you respond as a manager, or, what kind of culture do you want to get to?
First of all, I think it's important that employees know that their first response should be for their own safety and to get away from the object, and regardless of how silly they may think it is, if it looks out of place, question it. And that seems to be an ongoing theme in our office. If it looks out of place, question it and to get away from it. I think since 9/11, everybody's living in a different world. We're not as trusting as we used to be. I know I was here at the AO when there was a van parked in front of Union Station, and they evacuated this building for like 3 hours until they found the owner of that van. So, and I don't think that was an overreaction, and it just happened to be a van parked in front of Union Station. There was, believe it or not, someone actually left a briefcase in front of our building in Lower Manhattan. Just walked away. I just put it down and walked away from it. I guess he had other packages or something, I don't know. But they did call the police. They cordoned off the area, the whole thing, and it just happened to be somebody's briefcase.
Right.
So, so things have certainly changed, and people do not hesitate any longer to get the proper authorities involved. And I think that that is just a part of our cultural change post 9/11. In the past, somebody might have walked over and just opened up that briefcase to see if there was an ID in it. I venture to say that there would be very few people that would do that today, especially in an area where there are disgruntled people coming in, probation, bankruptcy. They're not all that happy to be there. So there is a good possibility that someone may be trying to sneak something in there that really doesn't belong.
So just don't compromise when it comes to safety.
And absolutely no compromises when it comes to safety. We have some sheets that we have on around. One is what to do in the case of a bomb threat. The other side of it is what to do in case of an emergency. And the very first thing is, if you're in immediate danger, get away. And then if you have time, do these other things. So I think everybody is fully aware that safety first.
Well, that's the final word, and I think the final thought, and a good thought, to keep safety first in your minds. I wish we did have some more time to get into the issues, but our time is quickly passed. And again, you've got handouts with additional questions, and please take the time to discuss safety. Before closing, I want to encourage you to turn in your evaluations of this broadcast. And also, I would like to thank our panel, and it's been a privilege to work with Judd, with Ellie, with Kathleen, and on the phone with John and Stefan. I also want to mention that it has been a personal honor and privilege for me to work with the United States court system, and that the work you do is important. So please remember to stay safe, do good work, and keep in touch. We'll see you at the next broadcast.